Today we're going to be expanding on Stevens Four-Mallet grip for marimba. We'll be diving deep into the technical descriptions in Lee Howard Stevens' book, Method of Movement for Marimba, so I hope that you're prepared. Grab a pair of mallets and practice alongside for the best results. I highly recommend that you pause after each chapter and write down the important pieces of information that you can remember off the top of your head. You don't have to get everything perfect or even accurate, just write down moments that you can recall. At the end of the video, use your mallets and mentally checkmark each chapter and what you can remember about the technique needed for each stroke. This is what we call active recall and will help you to remember these tips when you are in your individual practice. This video is valuable for players of all ages and experience, as since the release of this book, his Stevens grip has pretty much become the standard for marimbas across the US. Even if you feel like you've mastered an element of this grip, it's always important to keep an open mind and continue to learn every day. Stevens grip was created by renowned marimbist Lee Howard Stevens in the 1970s. His book, Method of Movement for Marimba, outlines his approach to this technique and contains hundreds of exercises. I recommend buying it for anyone who is serious about percussion. I'm following the basic skeleton of his book, though I've moved the order I introduce certain topics to ease the access for people who might just be starting out on four-mallets. If that's you, then congratulations and good luck. Remember to pause and write what you can recall after each chapter if you want to store this information in your brain. On screen is the table of contents. I have chapters on the timeline as well for those of you who want to skip around or maybe just want to learn a particular aspect of this technique a little more. Grab your mallets and let's get started. Let's outline some basic principles of marimba technique and understand why we make some of our technical decisions. Large muscles such as your legs, lower torso, and arms control large, slow gestures, while small muscles like the wrist and fingers are for smaller gestures. For example, your arms will control horizontal motion and have small vertical and forward movement for accidentals, your wrist accelerates the mallet head to the bar, and your fingers determine the interval shifting speed and make minor mallet acceleration adjustments. According to Stevens, it's harmless for small muscles to participate in large muscle tasks, like the wrist helping horizontal movement, but large muscles participating in the tasks of smaller muscle sets, such as using arm to accelerate the mallet head to the bar, can be harmful. Large muscles helping small muscles perform adds a lot of tension and wasted energy to our stroke and therefore will choke our sound. Also, large muscles should begin their task earlier than the small or fast muscle set that they're attached to. To explain the grip, we have a labeling system for the parts of our hand. Here is a diagram based on method of movement. The thumb is simply the thumb, finger 1 is the index finger, 2 the middle, 3 the ring, and 4 the pinky. Each finger is made of 3 joints and 3 quote-unquote sections, which are the flesh parts in between the joints. The section closest to the palm is the first section, and the outermost is the third. The first joint is at the base of the finger touching the palm, and the third joint is the farthest joint away from your hand. This is unlike in previous videos I've made, where I described the furthest joint as a second joint, so if you've watched those, please take care to note that. In addition to a labeling system for the hands, we also have a labeling system for our mallets. From left to right, we have mallet 1 through 4. This will become more important once we address single independence and single alternating strokes. Okay, so those are the parts of the hand and what we call each mallet, but how do we actually hold the mallets? We're going to begin by placing our outer mallet. Step 1. Keeping your wrists and fingers relaxed, take your mallet and insert the shaft in between fingers 2 and 3. Keep about 1/4 of an inch of the mallet sticking out of the bottom of finger 4. Rest the shaft on the second joint of finger 3. Step 2. Curl both fingers 3 and 4 around that mallet until the fingertips touch your palms. The mallet will hang in position, the weight of the mallet head pulling slightly on fingers 3 and 4. The shaft should lie on top of finger 3's second joint and beneath the first section of finger 2, close to the second joint. Continuing on, let's move to the inside mallet. Step 3. Keeping all fingers relaxed, place the butt of your second mallet into the fleshy part of your palm, about 1 to 1.5 inches below the base of your thumb. Rest the shaft on the third joint of your finger 1. The weight of the mallet head will pull down, but the mallet will stay balanced by the flesh of your palm. In high school, I was taught to put the butt of the stick directly in the center of my palm or just off center, which is a great way to simplify the concept for someone who isn't going to go as in depth with it, but since you're watching this video, I'm assuming that you want to hear exactly what Stevens has to say about it, so we're going to do it that way. Step 4. Drop your thumb onto the handle with the pad being directly across from the third joint of finger 1. And finally, curl your finger 2 so the pad touches the end of the inside mallet shaft. All fingers should be relaxed and the inside mallet should be hanging about 1 inch to 1.5 inches longer than the outside mallet. This is how Stevens grip should feel in your hand. You'll get more comfortable with this in time, but forming correct habits from the beginning will set you up for success for years to come. Holding the mallets correctly is almost effortless. Now, on your own, go back to step 1 and form your grip without any tension whatsoever. Pause the video now and reform your grip with both hands. Now that we've formed our grip, we can talk about playing position and actually playing the notes. At playing position, all mallet heads will be resting about 4 to 6 inches evenly above the board. Stevens recommends memorizing these 10 aspects of interval changing. Try each motion described as I go, pausing as needed. 1. As the interval opens, the inside mallet is going to spin counterclockwise slightly as finger 1 straightens and moves to the side of the mallet rather than underneath. When closing the interval, the mallet's going to spin in the opposite direction and finger 1 is going to curl inward. 2. In rest position, the inner mallet is going to line up with the thumb. As the interval opens, the mallet shifts more to the side of the thumb rather than the pad. You may notice that the thumb and finger 1 work across from one another. This is because the two always work juxtaposed. One common problem is that players will curl finger 1 underneath the inner mallet at large intervals. The thumb and the index finger are always across from one another, so whenever we go to large intervals and we shift to the side of the thumb, we also shift to the side of finger 1 as it straightens out. 3. For large intervals that last a while, you can realign the thumb position from the side to the pad, though this is typically unnecessary. 4. As the interval opens, the butt of the inside mallet is going to inscribe an arc extending from the resting place beneath the base of the thumb to the very first joint of finger 2. 5. If you tend to change the placement of finger 1 on the thumb while you're playing, your mallet length is incorrect. If the butt catches on the flesh at the base of finger 2 when shifting, you should reset to resting position and move the butt closer to the base of the thumb, so shift it up. If you lack support from the palm, try bringing the butt away from the base of the thumb. 6. Finger 2 is the major supporter of the end of the inner mallet shaft and helps open and close the interval. Finger 2 stays bent. The only hinge which straightens is the first joint right at the base. The joint at the base of the finger does most of the pushing and pulling of finger 2. As the interval grows, the first section of finger 2 approaches a straight line with the back of the hand. Keep finger 2 in firm contact with the last inch of the inner mallet shaft. Finger 2 will apply more pressure for extra support on large intervals, releasing, making less pressure when the interval changes. During large intervals, finger 2 snaps back into position to help close the interval. 7. Stevens calls this the Neanderthal grip. Do not put your thumbs in between the shafts. Sometimes we find ourselves making this mistake, especially during the large intervals, but this gets rid of all the nimbleness and adds tension that this grip was created to combat. When shifting intervals, especially to an octave, make sure that you're just spinning the mallet and putting it right at the base of your finger 2. 8. Finger 2's responsibility is only control and strength of the inner mallet, so it should never push the outside mallet to help open an interval. 9. As the interval opens, finger 3 will create a straight line with the back of the hand, but finger 4 will not. 10. As an exercise to strengthen our outer mallet muscles, imagine that you have to scratch an itch in the first joint of fingers 3 and 4 with the same fingertips. Repeat this until it doesn't itch. When we move back to our mallets, remember that unlike the exercise, finger 4 does not straighten with the back of the hand like finger 3 does. Finger 4 retains a secure grasp on the end of the mallet. Finally, study these step-by-step large interval positions that I've modeled after the book. Now, pause the video and try to recall aspects of the grip as you can, and write down what you can remember. Continuing on, how do we perform Stevens grip? Our 4 fundamental strokes are the double vertical, single independent, single alternating, and double lateral. Before we attempt to play these strokes, we have to consider shifts and interval changes. When we use the same mallet to traverse from one note to another, we don't want to waste any energy or time, so we're going to utilize the momentum of the mallet head. Before even playing our first note, we need to have an idea of where our next note is and be able to shift to it immediately following your first one. Don't reset back to playing position before shifting, rather reset to playing position while using your arm to get to the next note. You might be tempted to skip this part of the video because of how simple the double vertical seems, but in an effort to not create tension or waste any energy that we don't need to, Let's briefly talk about the motion so we can comprehend what's actually happening while we play. Keep your fingers relaxed and understand that the interval comes from the fingers while the stroke itself comes from the wrist. The mass of the mallet heads will create a smooth trajectory to the bars as we strike. Play with a complete piston stroke, no prep or lift before striking. The stroke should feel as if the mallet head is bouncing off the bar and your hand will feel like it's following the mallet heads back into position. Make sure your thumb's rotated inward slightly and try that motion now. Quickly, let's talk about hand position. Hand position, or as I like to call it, wrist rotation, is a term we use to describe the amount of rotation that the wrist has in relation to the board. 0 degrees is the palm completely flat and held down, facing the board from above. At this angle, the nails of your thumbs will face inward. 90 degrees is completely perpendicular and sees your thumbnails pointing straight up to the ceiling. If we begin at rest position when the interval is small and on the same plane, rotate the wrist slightly counterclockwise with your right hand and clockwise with your left, so that the outside edge of your hand faces a little outward. The goal is just short of perpendicular, so 80 to 89 degrees. If you perform the double vertical with your hand position at 90 degrees with your thumb sticking straight up, you'll need an awkward, small, and stiff wrist arc to help perform the stroke. If the accidental is on the inside mallet, then rotate your wrist inward to a more vertical position, even going past perpendicular if needed, at about 80 to 100 degrees. If the accidental is on the outside, rotate outward to a more flat palmed hand position at 45 to 80 degrees. Because of the way we use our elbows, the wrist curvature angle, which is the wrist's relation to the forearm, increases proportionally to the hand position angle. The more degrees in our hand position, the more degrees in our wrist curvature. The closer the wrist rotation gets to 90 degrees, the more the double vertical stroke turns into a rotary twist, like a single independent. The more the wrist rotation and wrist curvature decrease, the more the stroke becomes like a snare or 2-mallet stroke, simply hinging off of the wrist like you're knocking on a door. Pause the video and try to recall these different hand positions now. 2 things to remember about large intervals. 1. Use an 80 to 90 degree wrist rotation regardless of the accidental configuration when it comes to these large intervals. 2. You can't power the double vertical stroke with rotation as the mallet spread approaches 90 degrees. You're going to want to spend more time working the large intervals because these are much harder than the small ones. Here are some video examples I made based off the pictures and method of movement. The elbow lead shift. Let's say you have 2 double verticals that require your wrist curvature to be at an awkward angle, like it is in this example. Because the 2 notes you're playing are on 2 different planes and so close together, you're actually going to be more comfortable playing with your elbow away from you. As we discussed earlier, your elbow is attached to the larger and slower arm and needs to lead the shift so that the hand and the mallets don't arrive to the next note late. Your wrist is going to follow. As an exercise, hold your elbow out to the side and parallel with your shoulder. Let your wrist hang freely. Reach across your body with your other hand and place that hand on top of the arm at the elbow. Briskly push the elbow and arm down and into the torso. The wrist will flip to the outside. Practice the example with this in mind. Another example that you can try is putting all 4 mallets on the notes of the B-flat major chord, so B-flat, D, F, and a high B-flat. And after performing those notes, move both hands outward to the next inversion while shooting your elbows in. Practice shifting quickly so you get used to the movement. This exercise is actually exercise number 203 in method of movement. Our second kind of interval change is the passive interval change. With the passive interval change, we harness the inertia of the mallets to change intervals easily without making any mechanical changes. These are easiest with large shifts. When the interval goes from large to small, you should spend almost no energy on the interval change, instead keeping the inside mallet passive until the outer mallet is whatever the second interval is away from the inside mallet. A single independent is when you use the torque of the wrist to strike one note without moving the other mallet that's in the same hand. Another way to think about it is one mallet pivots around the unused mallet shaft, as if the unused mallet shaft is the axle of the stroke. The mallet returns to the same height that it began, just like a piston stroke. To practice this, drop your mallets and put your right hand in position to shake someone else's hand. Now with that same hand, pretend you're holding a light bulb and screw it into an outlet in the wall. The motion of screwing in is clockwise with your right hand and we'll be playing a single independent in your mallet 4. If you are unscrewing the light bulb, then we'll be playing with mallet 3. Now try it with your mallets. Make sure to keep your fingers relaxed because your fingers act as shock absorbers for any misdirected energy and will keep your unused mallet still if you're properly relaxed and pivoting around the mallet. Here's an exercise that you can try to feel and see any dysfunctional movement in the unused mallet. Reach over the inner mallet with a free hand and lightly cup the unused mallet in the palm of your hand while you play. It's easier to practice single independence at an interval of a fifth or a sixth rather than the smaller third, because the smaller the interval, the more torque your wrist will need to play at the same dynamic. If you find this technique to be easy, you should slow it down and aim for more volume while retaining the quote-unquote feel of the stroke. Pause the video now and try the single independent motion with each mallet. For advanced students, the wrist provides the basic motive power of the stroke, but you can also use finger acceleration for accents in single independent strokes. Accelerating your outer mallet head with your fingers is pretty much the opposite of that outer mallet strength exercise that we outlined earlier. Rather than pulling away, fingers 3 and 4 are going to jab into the flesh of the palm. The finger motion for the inner mallet is much more natural and easier. Merely bend your thumb like a twitch at the second joint. Just remember, for all single independent strokes, the main objective is even sounding and effortless strokes. A single alternating stroke is one hand playing multiple pitches successively with alternating mallets, either 1 to 2 or 3 to 4. We can tend to think of single alternating strokes as similar to single independent, but the motion is quite different. The motion is still produced from the wrist, but we use some vertical and forward motion of the hand to rock the pivot points back and forth. With single alternating strokes, there are multiple pivot points, rather than pivoting around just one or the other mallet shaft. Although there are still 2 different motions for each note on one hand, because of the multiple pivot points, there isn't really a need to keep the mallet not currently striking the board motionless. When performed correctly, the mallet not currently striking the board will have a tendency to shoot up about a centimeter or so, while the other descends to the bar. Importantly, the relative dynamics between the mallets on one hand will determine the position of the axle or the pivot point. This is just to say that the pivot point of the stroke is always closer to the handle of the mallet with the lower dynamic level. So let's say we have a piano or a quiet dynamic in mallet 1 and a forte in mallet 2. I'm imagining that the pivot point is about 10 degrees away from mallet 1 since I need more torque to play the forte on mallet 2. Here are some quick tips before we move on to our next section. The descent of one mallet will produce or complete the recovery of the other. Single alternating strokes on the same plane utilize a hand position of a few degrees short of vertical, so 80 to 89. Accidentals on the outside use a more flat palmed approach, and accidentals on the inside are a more vertical hand position, just like with the double verticals. The use of fingers with this stroke is extremely limited, and you'll produce better results by just working with a pivot point. While shifting intervals, it's unavoidable that some horizontal velocity will be channeled into the stroke. This makes fingers a factor in controlling dynamics. The faster the strokes alternate and the more radical the interval changes, the greater the proportion of energy produced by the fingers. Just stay relaxed. I want to talk about beating spots before we discuss the double lateral. I don't recommend beginners start looking at this technique until they master first the double vertical and the single independent. As we talked about in the 2 mallet video, the best beating spot is in the center of the bar, and the second best is the edge of the bar, especially for the accidentals. The variables that affect tone are our volume, beating spots, and the angle of our mallets. That's 3 variables per note, and with 4 notes in a chord, that gives us 12 factors which can affect the tone. In context, that creates an overwhelming amount of musical choices for us to consider. The tone you produce during just an 8-bar excerpt of a piece is just as unique as your voice or handwriting. Sound color can range from dark to bright. A dark sound has strong fundamentals and an emphasis on lower pitches, while bright sounds refer to strong harmonics and an emphasis on higher pitches. Stevens outlines 6 timbre combinations ranging from dark to bright. I'll play these 6 examples for you now. If you ignore the aspects that affect tone in your technical practice, your imagination is going to have no musical reflexes to call upon when you need it. You're going to be frustrated and unable to produce the sounds that you hear in your mind. To be a great player, you must strive for balance between technical ability and imagination and musical expression. Stevens encourages all of us to practice manipulating the tone color. A double lateral is a single quick motion for 2 consecutive pitches and are easier at large intervals such as 6 to octaves. The motion isn't the same as single independence or even single alternating strokes. In your practice, keep the quick motion, and even if you slow down the tempo, don't slow down the motion. The double lateral doesn't function at low tempi. The double lateral outside to inside stroke begins as a double vertical with a raised inner mallet and transforms into a single independent motion immediately following the outer mallet hitting the bar. When you play inside to outside, it's a mirror of this motion, beginning also as a double vertical and then shifting into a single independent. The rotary twist of the single independent side of this motion generates power in the second attacking mallet, while the double vertical generates power for the first. The double lateral is a unified gesture, as Stevens describes it, one curvaceous motion, whether down and rotating out for an outside to inside stroke or down and rotating in for the inside to outside. Here are a couple tips before we wrap up. For small intervals, the torque during the single independent part of the stroke must be great, or the second pitch will not speak as loudly as the first. At large intervals, the wrist rotation is less pronounced since it costs less energy to output the same volume. Generally, you'll have a straight line between the back of your hand and the forearm when the first mallet makes contact with the bar, whether it's the inside or the outside. For more power in your striking mallet, try this exercise out. Take your two mallets in your right hand and hold them out in playing position. Hold your free hand palm down a few inches above your first striking mallet and snap the mallet up into your palm with a rotary twist. The harder that you hit the palm, the louder the second note will speak. Again, because the double lateral strokes don't function slowly, only use the laterals when the pitches are rhythmically close enough to be struck with one motion. Use your wrist to produce the double lateral gesture, and after a few months of practice, you will naturally harness finger control and power. Don't try to achieve any additional power or control through the fingers whenever you're first starting out. Once finger acceleration is implemented, the finger motion is identical to those that we used earlier for the single strokes. Here are some videos that I took to put motion to the pictures that Stevens provides in his book. An additional visual example for the motion needed for double lateral strokes is to imagine you're holding two paintbrushes with your Stevens grip and you're drawing a series of tilted ellipses on a canvas like this shape. The motion of your hands resembles the double lateral motion. Stevens has a number of laws he calls Lee's laws in his book. I'm going to share a few with you, and I recommend you buy his book for the hundreds of exercises that follow. Law number 1, perfect practice makes perfect. Law number 2, shift quickly. Do not practice slow shifts or your positions will not be exact and repeatable. Law number 3, develop enough strength so you're only using 50% of your power at fortissimo. Using 90% of your power will always produce tension, which we don't want. These are just a few of the amazing things that Lee Howard Stevens has to say about Four-Mallet Marimba technique. I'm not sponsored by him or anything like that, but I wanted to make sure that everyone has access to the amazing information shared in his handbook. This book is basically our Bible to Stevens grip, so I hope that you learned something that perhaps you didn't know before. In conclusion, the basic tasks such as interval change, shift, and stroke recovery should be combined into one single gesture or motion. Parts of gestures should be timed to produce curved motions, so we don't waste any energy or momentum. Duties of the different muscles should be separated, like fingers remaining ready to change intervals, even when the nearby wrist muscles are producing fortissimo strokes, and all of this is happening while the arm stays relaxed and ready to shift when you need it. Efficiently sustain the momentum until the end of a particular gesture, and use inertia to execute passive interval changes. And finally, employ all technique in service of musical expression. If there's anything you felt left out or didn't explain enough, please leave me a comment and I will try to reply as soon as possible. Thanks for watching and happy practicing.